for joining us for the National Estuary Coastal Watersheds Grant Program. This is Suzanne Simon with Restore America's Estuaries. Some quick housekeeping and process items. All attendees are on mute. Please submit questions and comments through the webinar control panel. This webinar will be recorded and posted on the RAE YouTube channel. And as a friendly reminder to all of our panelists, please mute yourselves to cut down on background noise. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Restore America's Estuaries, we are a national organization dedicated to the protection and restoration of bays and estuaries as essential resources for our nation. We also have 10 member groups around the country. You can see here on this map that we literally could not do what we do without them. So we are grateful for that. Many of you know us for the 2020 summit and the ones that came before. Not surprising, in these times of upheaval, we are going virtual. So the dates, the new dates are September 28th through 30th. Originally, we were going to be in Providence, Rhode Island, but the new dates are September 28th through 30th. So please make sure that you check out our webpage there. The link is at the bottom, and that you make plans to join us. We are going to have a very robust program, lots of networking, still working it all out, as I'm sure you can probably imagine. What we will cover today. We will be doing a brief kind of program introduction. A lot is going to be focused on eligibility based on some of the questions that we have already received, and then going over funding, match, budget, and the overall application questions. We are generally going to stick to bigger picture clarifications. That is based on some of the questions that we have received post the release of the RFP. If you have really specific questions, please contact me via email directly following the webinar, and I might be able to give you some more specific advice if it's a pretty unique situation. All of the questions and comments that are submitted through the webinar will be recorded as part of the overall process. I will review the questions and comments submitted and will update the frequently asked question document as needed. There is currently one on the RAE Coastal Watersheds Grant webpage. I would encourage you to look at that. So I would also like to take a moment or two to thank the whole team that is on today. From RAE, we have Nicole Breslin-Romano and Elsa Schwartz. From the EPA team, we have Connie Canap, Robin Holder, and Nancy Lowerson. So with that, I will turn it over, at least for the hearing portion of it, to Nancy Lowerson to give some introductory remarks. Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne. Hi, everyone. As Suzanne said, I'm Nancy Lowerson, and I'm a National Estuary Program, or NEP, coordinator here at EPA. And I'm also the project officer for the agreement EPA has with RA to administer this NEP Coastal Watershed Grant. EPA is really excited about the launch of this new national competitive program and about the level of interest in it by looking at the large number of participants we have on the webinar today. Here's some background on how this came about. Section 320 of the Clean Water Act, which established the NEP back in 1987, was reauthorized in 2016. That legislation required competitive grants be awarded to address a number of urgent and challenging issues that threaten the ecological and economic well-being of coastal and estuarine areas. Congress identified 7 priority issues, which were the following: seagrass loss, harmful algal blooms, unusual marine mammal mortalities, invasive exotic species, proliferation, flooding that may be related to sea level rise, and low dissolved oxygen conditions related to nutrient management. In response to the legislation, EPA developed a solicitation for applicants to administer a national competitive subaward grant program on its behalf. In doing so, we thought it necessary to expand the priority issues list from Congress by adding the following: loss of mangroves, tidal and freshwater wetlands, forested wetlands, kelp beds, shellfish beds, and coral reefs, coastal erosion that may be related to sea level rise and changing precipitation, impacts of warmer water temperatures on aquatic life and coastal ecosystems, and contaminants of emerging concerns such as pharmaceuticals, personal care products, and microplastics. Based on those issues, we determined that the geographic boundary of project eligibility should then go beyond NEP study areas. And the study areas are the estuaries and surrounding watersheds where the NEPs focus their work to implement their Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, or CCMP. So as a result, while this is anchored in the NEP, it incorporates as eligible further landward and seaward areas. EP also determined that the goal would be to address the urgent challenging issues identified by carrying out actions in an EPA-approved CCMP or by clearly linking projects to existing state or locally approved community-based watershed management plans in those eligible areas. EPA then issued the solicitation, and RAE was chosen to administer this NEP Coastal Watershed Grant Subaward Program. And it's important to mention that although these grants are made by RAE, these are pass-through funds that are subject to the same EPA requirements. So for example, if environmental data is being collected or compiled, a Quality Assurance Project Plan, or QAP, is required and will need to be approved in advance. So with that, I'll close by saying EPA is really delighted to be working with RAE on this new grant, and we very much look forward to supporting projects that will make a difference in the health of our coast and estuaries. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Suzanne.
Great, thank you, Nancy. I certainly appreciate that. And so now we're going to head into some of the deeper parts of eligibility. All right, here we go. So this has been the number one question that I think we as a group have received so far, which is, what areas are included? Is my project in an eligible area? So to make this hopefully very, very clear, all projects must occur within the designated geographic areas shown on the map in orange or red, depending on how it shows up on your screen. There are links off of the request for proposals, you'll hear me call it the RFP, on the RAE webpage and on the EPA website that take you to an interactive map. Please use the zoom function and that will get you down to the street level of detail. So all of these areas occur in the United States. Most of them, with the exception of Puerto Rico, occur in the continental U.S. So I'm going to give you an example of something that I have seen, maybe I should say an actual question I got. I'm going to back up real quick. So the question was, is a project in the Pascagoula River eligible? Okay, for those who don't know where Pascagoula River is, it's down in this area. So I can totally appreciate why it's very difficult to see based on this kind of higher map. So here we are, here's Pascagoula River. You can see over here, here's delineation. The stuff in red would be eligible. The stuff over here is not. So simply put, a project in the Pascagoula River would not be eligible. All righty. So moving on. Actually, I'm going to back it up. I don't think we have any. Okay, we haven't gotten any questions that I have seen. I guess, Elsa, have any other questions on eligibility for geography come in?
No, they have not.
Okay, great. Then we're going to keep moving on. Here we go. So for eligibility, the projects must, you can see here, I'm not going to read them, bullet for bullet, but basically they have to harken back to one of
Suzanne, it appears we lost your audio.
everyone. Sorry about that. My line just went dead. I am so sorry about that. And thank you for all of you who are saying, oh my goodness. Yes, thank you for letting us know. That dial tone in the middle of a webinar is not really what you want to hear. Okay, getting back in the swing of things. So please check with the RFP. That has all of the details here. These are the high-level issues. And so I also want to call out that Nancy talked about some of the priorities. This round of RFP will also focus on the top 3 priorities as identified here in the orange: nutrients, loss of habitat, flooding, and coastal erosion. Please note that these priorities will change with future award rounds. The idea being we cannot necessarily get to all of the high priorities in one given award round. So please know that if you work on some of these other issues, that they will hopefully come up. Okie dokie. I am going to continue in terms of what is not allowed, and then we'll take a pause for questions and comments. All right, and again, that is more detailed in the RFP. So research, basically this is research for research's sake. Standalone outreach and education is not allowed. It can be incorporated as long as it addresses some other issues. Monitoring, again, sort of for monitoring's sake, monitoring is okay so long as it results or informs on the ground activities and changes. Land acquisition, please note that land acquisition can be used for match. Another thing that you cannot include is social surveys, questionnaires, and similar efforts. And then activities required as part of legal settlements, mitigation, and similar activities. So again, please check back with the RFP in terms of what is allowed or not allowed. Yeah, sorry again, folks, for that audio hiccup. Okay, so Nancy, I'm going to ask you to field one of these a little bit. One of the questions that came on is, since the geographic scope of eligibility goes beyond the area covered by NEPs, how can a project outside the NEP area demonstrate how it relates to a CCMP? I think this is one of the circumstances where you point to one of those other publicly developed community-based management schemes,
Exactly.
correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mentioned that either has to be tied to a CCMP or a state or locally approved community-based watershed management plan. And that essentially is a completed plan that's approved by and available to the public that contains actions that address the urgent challenging issues identified in the subaward, demonstrate state or local buy-in and commitment to implement the actions by the appropriate parties, and applies to the defined eligible areas.
Great, thank you. Another question came in regarding social surveys and questionnaires. They cannot be used as match, even if the funding is provided through other means, and that is also in the RFP. Let's see. So again, I'm seeing a bunch of specific questions about geographic areas. So if you have specific questions about a particular water body, go ahead and send me. This is Suzanne Simon, simon@estuaries.org, an email, and we can provide some specific answers. The social survey, another question about social surveys. Let's see, social surveys to assess community engagement. Again, anything that is going to be collecting data from stakeholders or any sort of feedback that even kind of looks like a stakeholder survey or something like that, it runs afoul of some federal laws. And Nancy, it's the Paperwork Reduction Act, I believe. So that is something that cannot be allowed. I mean, obviously, if you want to do it under a different program, go for it. But you know, it cannot be a part either as a request for funding or as match for these. Okay, some other questions about what is not allowed. Can you elaborate on how research is not allowed? Is it possible to use research as part of the proposals if it directly impacts management and implementation on the ground? So, Nancy, I think this is another one where so long as the research informs on the ground activities or changes or policies, then it would be, but research kind of for the sake of research that's where the nuance is. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. I think. All right. So Elsa, I'm going to ask you, are there some other things that went by?
There was a question.
To touch on?
There was a question about the timing of the grant window, the 1 to 2 years, when that clock starts.
And Elsa, this might be a question back to you. I think that is once the contract is signed, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Right. And I will get to some of that in terms of the timelines. Okay. All right. Any other, so I guess Elsa or Nancy, who have been monitoring some of the comments and questions, is there anything else that we should stop to address right now?
I think we're good, Suzanne, from what I can see.
Okay. Elsa, anything else you think we need to address? Okay, I think I'll take that as we're good to go. On to entities in terms of eligibility. And again, anybody who has questions that we don't cover here, we will be capturing all the questions that have been asked, and we will go back and update the frequently asked questions document if need be. And also please do a deep dive into the RFP, because some of the questions I'm seeing come in are answered in some capacity in the RFP. Alrighty, on to entities. This is sort of a laundry list of what it was already in the RFP, but we've added some additional clarifications based on some questions that have come in. Public organizations, state, county, local, regional entities. This would include, interstate consortia, water pollution sort of folks. Nonprofit organizations, that's pretty straightforward. The one thing I want to add here is that you have to be able to demonstrate your nonprofit status. So just be able to do so and ready to do so. Academic institutions are eligible, tribes are eligible. For-profit organizations and federal agencies may be on a team, but not as the applicant or prime. Please make sure for contractors, and particularly for for-profit organizations, that you have to follow the procurement and competitive guidelines. Another question that came in a couple of times, team members and applicants may be based in Canada, but all the work has to occur in the United States, again, in those geographic eligibility areas. Last but not least, we've had some questions on this because of the count of proposals. Team member, the definition of a team member is those who will receive funds and are listed in the budget. So if there are some circumstances where you might have somebody, an organization that is in more advisory capacity, we opted to kind of refine that in terms of receiving funds and listed in the budget. Okay, we'll pause there for a moment. Elsa, any questions that have come in about entity eligibility?
I think you just addressed them all.
Excellent. Hooray. All right, moving on. Funding and number of awards. This is one that most folks want to know. We will have approximately $1.5 million to go out in subawards for project costs. It's listed in the RFP. I'll say it again, though, $75,000 to $250,000. So when you do the math, we have a total of 6 to 20 awards that we are currently anticipating. All right, so that takes us to the budget. So I cannot stress this enough. Please follow the budget table in the RFP. Spiffily on page 13 of the RFP, there's that snapshot right there. Particularly with respect to the categories. These are federally mandated categories, and it will make everybody's lives a lot easier if you follow them. This is also included in the RFP, but just to go over it, because it's a big deal, match. It is 33% of the non-federal match. Also, you can frame it as 25% of the total project cost. For a very simple example, if you're requesting $100,000, the required non-federal match is $33,000 for a project total of $133,000. So examples of match include volunteer time, in-kind contribution, time and efforts of partners that are not included in the budget. Again, there are many other options for match, and so if you have any specific questions, go ahead and send me an email, and we can get to those, because again, some people have very specific questions. Listed in the budget equals match as well. So I think the question is if they're listed in the budget as match. Elsa, can you help me interpret that one? Listed in the budget equals match as well.
I'm not sure what they mean by that.
Okay. So I guess if the person who asked that question, if you could send me an email directly and we can work on that. So federal entities, they can be team members like subs. They cannot be the applicant. Does salary count as match? And Elsa, I'm going to look at you on this one. I believe the answer is it can, and it has to be documented as such. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Elsa, do you see any others coming? Oh, this is a good one. Sorry, one just came in. How will we handle the risk of matching funds being lost at a later time due to a COVID budget cut? Great question. I think we're going to need to tackle that one as it comes. I realize that is not a terribly fulfilling answer at this time, but we are completely aware and sympathetic to the fact that particularly public agency budgets are very much in flux. So we will be sensitive to that, and still we're going to need to figure out how to make all of the match add up and all of those other concerns. Can you match with Restore Act funding? So all match, and Elsa, I'm going to ask you this question. All match has to be non-federal match, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so I think the short answer to Restore Act funding is no. If assuming that I'm assuming that it is federal funding. Okie dokie. Elsa, any other questions that are coming in that you see that we need to address?
There's a lot of questions coming in that if they're providing match, does that count as their 3 allowed application limit?
That is a good question. Nancy, do you have any thoughts off the top of your head on that one?
Yeah, I think that's another, Suzanne, that we'll have to
Okay.
look into and get back to folks.
Okay, thank you very much for asking that. We will take a look at that and put that in the frequently asked questions document.
A few more.
Okay,
yes, indirect can be used as match. And there's a question about, can a match source be pending?
I think that's another one that depends on the time. I have gotten this question already where the deadlines and the timelines for this are slightly out of sync with, in this case, it was a state budget. What we said was go ahead and submit on the assumption that the state budget was going to come through, and then we can make an assessment at a later time. Okay. So Elsa, this is another question for you. What is indirect percent on the request side of the budget? Is that something that you can easily answer, or?
The indirect percentage depends on whether the applicant has a NICRA, a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement.
Okay,
And,
so that
and
might
if you,
be on a case-by-case basis, right?
yes, and if you do have a NICRA, please provide that documentation in your application.
Great, thank you. And to answer some other questions that are coming in, yes, this webinar is currently being recorded and will be posted to the Ray YouTube channel with a link on the Coastal Watersheds grant webpage. Okay, I think we've covered kind of the bulk of the budget match topics that have come in. So let's go ahead and keep moving forward. Application and deadlines. This is, I hope, pretty obvious in the RFP. It's a two-step process. The first is a letter of intent, and then LOI, followed by a proposal if invited. So the logic behind this was hopefully to save everybody some time and grief. And so we wanted to make it hopefully as easy as possible on everybody involved. So I cannot stress this enough. Please follow the criteria and directions outlined in the RFP, particularly with respect to the page limits and budget. So here are the critical dates. The LOIs are due on August 7th. We will then notify applicants of their status, in other words, if they are being invited to do a full proposal or not, on September 8th, and then approximately 2 months later for the full proposals. Our goal is to have the project fully contracted by the end of the calendar year. And so I hope that answers a little bit of the question on, what happens if, our state budgets are kind of in flux, so that hopefully will give folks some time to be able to get to some of those issues. All right. So submittal process, and after this, I will pause again. All of us have been sufficiently traumatized by overly complex submittal processes, so we try to keep this relatively straightforward. So please combine all the application materials into one PDF. Use the reduce size option. So when you're doing the save as, you can hit reduce size. The point of that is we have some size upload limits. So fill out the online form and submit the PDF via the Ray website. There's a screenshot in the lower left. All of this is by and large contact information and upload the PDF. So we try to keep it relatively straightforward. You will receive an automatically generated email confirming your receipt. This will come literally within a minute or so. Please check your spam or junk mail because a lot of filters tend to be let's just say overly careful sometimes, which I get in this day and age. If you have already checked your spam or junk mail and you did not get it, or you're having other difficulties, please email me. There's my email address again, as soon as possible. And that is so I am aware of any problems in case other people are having it. And then the other issue is we need to be able to document that you have, in good faith, submitted in time for the deadline. And last but not least, I would certainly encourage you to submit early to the greatest degree possible. Okay, I feel like we've got a bunch of questions coming in. Elsa, can you give me a quick heads up in terms of any that we need to
answer? There are a lot of questions about the limit of 3. And there's a question on, is that just 3 LOIs or 3 full invited proposals?
It counts for the LOIs as well. So that was the conclusion we came to, because we were kind of concerned, given just the raw size of, in terms of how many people were going to be submitting. And that's why we also limit it to the people receiving funding. So that, it counts for the LOIs as well. And any other questions, Elsa?
Yes, there's still some confusion about the timing of match. I know you went over this, but I'm seeing some more questions come in and about whether or not the match needs to be committed.
Again, I think this is one we're going to have to take a little bit on a case-by-case basis, particularly given what's happening right now. For the full proposals, we do ask for a commitment of match and documentation of such. And again, I think it depends a little bit on the circumstance. So that is where we kind of need to leave that for the time being. I saw another question go by about, yes, about full proposals. Not every full proposal will be funded. So it's sort of a vetting process. So we'll go through the LOIs, and then we will, and again, this is all laid out in the RFP. We will then, choose those that we think will make promising full proposals, and then the full proposals, it's still a competitive process. And not all proposals will be funded. Okay, Elsa, what other questions? Anything else?
There are some more questions about whether design and planning are eligible.
I think we need to clarify some of this, but I think so long as it addresses on the ground or brings around on the ground changes to improve the conditions in an estuary, it would be considered. Nancy, is that correct?
I'd like to sort of get some more detail on the question, Suzanne, before.
Fair. Yeah, that's right. I think it depends on, this is another one, probably unfulfilling answers, which is it depends. But I think the key thing to keep in mind in all this is that whatever the activity, it needs to bring about changes that will ultimately address the 3 priorities and improve our estuaries. Another question came in that is very helpful, and I appreciate the prompt. The question basically is, do we hope to disperse the funding out equally or somewhat equally? We are looking to have some geographic diversity. We don't want all of it going to one particular region. So, and it will also depend on the quality of the proposals. I can tell you, based on the fact that we had 546 people registered for this all around the country, I have great faith that we're going to get good proposals and LOIs from all around the country. So we are going to be looking to try to have some geographic diversity. The PDF size limits are listed in the RFP, so I'd encourage you to take a look at that. This is an interesting question that came in. What type of person will be reviewing the proposals? These are folks with a variety of different backgrounds, so I cannot really say that they're all one sector or the other. They are all experienced with the various aspects of the priorities and have experience in terms of on the ground projects. Whether pre-project activities can be funded. Again, please refer to the RFP, and I'm assuming, I don't know if you mean pre-award or pre-project. I'm interpreting that as pre-award. Again, please check out the RFP. We provide information there. A lot of these other questions coming in are pretty specific, so I would ask that those with very specific questions go ahead and email me after this webinar is concluded, and I can get you some more detailed answers than I can in this context over the next couple of weeks. NEPs do not have priority status in the selection process. Again, this is an open competition. Again, we definitely want to see high quality projects come in. All right, Elsa. Any other projects that? Sorry, any other questions?
Are letters of support encouraged?
Again, check the RFP. They can go into the full proposals, and it really depends on the circumstance. So please read the RFP. They've got the answer in there. Another question came in about the NEP acknowledgement letter. Yeah, so one of the things that is required is a letter from the local or the nearest NEP acknowledging the project. So the reason this is in here is because in past circumstances, there have been projects that went on and the NEPs were unaware. This is simply a mechanism to hopefully encourage and increase communication. It is not a letter of endorsement or support, nor should it be interpreted as such. This is simply a way to make sure that folks are coordinating in the watershed. Okay, Nancy, are you seeing any questions go by that we need to tackle?
Suzanne, I have to admit that I've sort of lost my ability to look at the questions. I lost audio a while ago. I think we're having some power issues here. So I'm sorry to say I can't I can't see the questions.
Oh, that's okay. All right, then Elsa, is there any other questions or comments?
Here's a great one. What does NEP stand for?
Great question. National Estuary Program. So thank you for that. Oh, and also we've gotten some clarification on Restore Act. Getting in a little of the weeds, but for the folks in the Gulf, it is important. I think the important bit is that match just has to be non-federal funds. So keep that in mind, and is absolutely correct that if it's a natural resources damage assessment, but again, we're getting a little bit into that fuzzy area of legal settlements and things like that. So I think we need to, Nancy, we're going to need to look into that, I think, and Elsa a little bit more as it relates to whether that would be considered a legal settlement or similar mechanisms. Okie dokie. So for more information, please contact me, Suzanne Simon. I'm the main point of contact for this program. My email is there. The website is also listed. I've also listed Nancy Laursen at EPA in case folks have questions that are very specific to EPA. And so I guess I'll do kind of last call. Elsa, any other questions that we need to tackle?
The project start date, we have addressed that already, but that will be the start of the contract.
Okay. Another interesting question, does a project proposed at one NEP need to have value to other NEPs? That's really fascinating. I think a lot of the projects that come in, or I suspect, will have relevance to other NEPs, even if it is not immediately directly applicable. You know, so for example, if there is a new way to tackle nutrients that is done in one watershed, I think that will have relevance just because by its nature. So it is not a requirement. In other words, you don't have to demonstrate it necessarily. However, I strongly suspect that a lot of the projects as proposed will likely have relevance to other areas.
We have a question about whether a link will be sent out for this webinar.
We certainly can make that happen. Yes. The webinar, as I said, is recorded. We posted to the RAY YouTube site. We will put a link back to it on the RAY Coastal Watersheds grant webpage, and we can make sure that they're in the follow-up email. We can, make sure that folks are aware of where to find it. Okay, some others are coming in at the last minute. Will you be funding expanded priorities for this round? I'm not entirely sure what that one means. The priorities as stated in the RFP are the three that we already discussed. Nutrients, loss of habitat, and flooding and coastal erosion. Those are definitely going to be the three. We are fully aware that there are a number of other priorities, as Nancy alluded to in her introductory remarks, but those are the three that we're focused on now. Good question. Someone said, how can an NEP acknowledgement letter be required if the work is not within an NEP boundary? Again, this is where you need to touch base with the local NEP. It doesn't have to occur. The boundaries as currently established are largely based on the NEPs. There are some situations where they might be a little upstream or downstream, but you still need to get a letter of acknowledgement from the local NEP. In other words, if you're working an XYZ water body, you might be a little upstream or downstream. You still need to get a letter of acknowledgement from the closest NEP. This would be a continuing grant program. Good question. So yes, we anticipate having at least 2 more rounds after this. So yes, the intent is to make this more or less an annual subaward program. How do we know who our local NEP is? That's a great question. So if you go to the EPA has a map similar to the one, the interactive eligibility map. NEPs, if you go to the NEP website on EPA's larger website, you can find a map.
And Suzanne, that's at www.epa.gov/NEP.
Thank you. Okay, Elsa, any other questions that seem to be coming in that we need to tackle?
Are NEPs eligible for this funding?
Yes.
That was an easy one. And then, but I saw that one come through multiple times, so wanted to address it. Another question about the start date of the project and when projects are planning on being awarded. This is also, the award calendar is found in the RFP as well. And a lot of people are asking if a January 1 start date would be a reasonable for planning purposes.
The answer is yes. Our goal is to get all of these fully contracted by the end of this calendar year. So January 1st would be a reasonable time in terms of planning, with the caveat, of course, that, that assumes that the contracting goes without any substantial hiccups. But, yeah, I think for planning purposes that is reasonable. All right, any other questions? Elsa? Any others?
Is there a limit to the number of LOI and applications that an NEP can support, if not a direct team member on that project?
I think the initial answer would be no, but I am also going to reserve the right to ponder that one a little bit more, because if they are not receiving funding, nor will they be, kind of directly involved, I think that providing a letter of support would be okay. All right, any other questions? Elsa.
I'm going through them. I think a lot of these are more specific questions.
Okay, and again, just to reiterate, for those folks who are, I agree, I'm seeing some of these come through about specific different buckets of money to be used as match. Please go ahead and email me. My email is on that last slide. It should be up on your screen, ssimon@estuaries.org. All righty, well, we're getting up to the top of the hour, so on that front, I'm going to go ahead and start to wrap up. Special thanks again to the RAE and EPA teams for being on today. The EPA team of Nancy Laursen, Connie Cadnap, and Robin Holder, the RAE team of Nicole Breslin-Romano and Elsa Schwartz. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the RAE YouTube channel with a link on the RAE Coastal Watersheds Grant webpage. We certainly encourage you to apply. The turnout for today's webinar is very heartening, and it is a very good sign that we're going to have a nice, robust pool of applicants. So on that front, I will go ahead and stop the webinar. Again, please feel free to email me. Feel free to email Nancy as well, particularly if you've got those specific questions. And again, we will be going through all of the comments and questions that have been submitted as part of this webinar and updating the frequently asked questions document as well, which is also available through the RAE Coastal Watersheds Grant page. On that front, thank you very much. Have a great day and be well.